Hey listeners, welcome back to another new story with Unraveled Tales. I felt excited that finally, after 6.5 years of searching, I had actually found evidence of my wife cheating on me. Enjoy it. I used to fantasize that I was trying to catch my wife cheating on me. I don't know why I got a thrill out of doing that, but I did. My wife never had any idea of what I was doing. There wasn't really any reason for me to be suspicious of Linda, as she had never given me any reason to doubt her. I didn't check up on her because I thought she was cheating. I did it because it entertained me. I don't know if you can understand that because I'm not sure I understand it. I pretended that I knew Linda was cheating on me and would sit around trying to think of ways to find evidence to prove it. I would watch her dress for work in the morning and make a note of the kind and color of her panties, bra, stockings she put on. Then, when she came home at night, I would make sure that she was still wearing the same undergarments. When she ready for bed, I would go through the laundry hamper and check her cloths for C+M stains or other substances that you wouldn't normally expect to find there. Once or twice a week, I would follow her as she went out for lunch to see where she was going and with whom. On weekends and evenings, when Linda was going out shopping by herself or with friends, I would carefully follow her to make sure she was doing what she said she was doing. Once I even told Linda I had to go away on a business trip and then spent 3 days spying on her. I found ways to question Linda about different things she did, so that I could ask her about the same subject 2 or more different ways at different times to see if I got the same answer. After playing this game throughout 6 years of marriage, I had never found any incriminating evidence, nor did I ever catch Linda in a lie. The fact is, I never expected that I would. I knew Linda loved me and we had a good marriage. Remember, I only did this as a fantasy, a game to entertain myself. The odd thing is that I sometimes felt disappointed when I didn't see her at lunch with some guy I didn't know, then catch her in a lie about what she did that day. I guess that I was disappointed because I worked so hard looking for evidence that I felt I was a failure for not finding any. About 6 months ago, I started to notice some changes. The first thing I noticed was that Linda started wearing only dresses or skirts and blouses to work. No more pants. Next, she started wearing S-Kyer panties. While it excited me to watch Linda dressing this way, it worried me because I knew she wasn't doing it for me. As it was, Linda didn't know that I watched her dress and undress. She was unaware that I knew what she was wearing under her dresses and skirts each day. One night, about a month later, I had to work late and didn't get home till around 11 p.m. Linda was already in bed when I got home, so I just went into the bathroom to get ready for bed. The last thing I did before heading for bed was to look in the laundry hamper for Linda's cloths. When I examined the panties, I noticed that the crotch felt a little stiff and there was something white and crusty coating the inside of the crotch. This was not conclusive, but I now had evidence that another man might be ducking my beautiful and loving wife. This realization left me a little confused. I stayed up most of that night trying to decide what to do about Linda. I finally decided that I would not let on what I had found out, and would continue to watch her even closer now if that was possible. Update! For the next couple of weeks, I found nothing unusual in Linda's panties or in her behavior. As a matter of fact, our SX life, which had always been okay, was suddenly getting much better. Linda seemed to be enjoying SX with me more, and was becoming more aggressive in bed. I was beginning to think that maybe Linda had a one-time fling, and that her increased interest in SX with me was due to guilt. This was what I was thinking one evening, when we had just sat down to eat and Linda got a phone call. When she came back to the table, she said that her friend Carol had just called, and that they were going to run over to the mall after dinner to pick up a couple of things. I asked, like what? And Linda said she needed a new dress for work. This didn't sound unusual to me, but I decided to make very sure. After clearing the table, Linda went up to change clothes. I followed and stood outside our bedroom door and spied on her like I do every day. What happened next made me very suspicious. First, Linda took a quick shower, and when she got out and dried herself, she pulled a little bag out from under her dresser. The name on the bag was from an expensive lingerie store at the mall. She removed a matching bra and panty set from the bag and put them on. I couldn't understand how I could be sexually aroused looking at my wife when she may very well be preparing to go out and make love to another man. As Linda was putting her dress on, I went back downstairs. She was still getting ready to go when I called up to her and said that I had to run over to my office to get some papers and that I would see her when she got home later. Then I said, maybe when we get home we could make love. Linda's response was, I don't know, I'm not feeling real well. I'll probably just want to come home and go to bed. How about we plan to do it tomorrow night? I left the house knowing I should be angry, but I actually felt excited. Not so much sexually, but more like the excitement of the hunt. I pulled out of the driveway and headed for Carol's house. Carol only lived 4 blocks from us on the same street. I went 1 block toward Carol's house, then made a right turn, went partway down the block and turned around and drove back up to just short of the intersection and parked the car. This way, I would be able to see Linda coming down the street, and she wouldn't see me parked around the corner. Then, as she passed, I could pull out and follow her at a safe distance to Carol's house, then follow both of them to see what they were up to. Linda must have been in a hurry because I saw her approaching the intersection, where I was waiting only a couple of minutes after I got there. I started my engine and waited for her to pass, but to my surprise, she didn't pass. Instead, she made a right turn, causing me to have to duck below the door so she wouldn't see me. When I sat up again, she was headed down the street I was parked on, but in the opposite direction. There were 4 or 5 cars coming up behind me, so I couldn't pull out and make a U-turn to go after Linda. By the time I was able to pull out, Linda's car was out of sight. Then it dawned on me that it wasn't Carol that called Linda at dinner, and Carol is not involved in whatever Linda was up to tonight. It had just not occurred to me that Linda was lying about the phone call. I blew my chance to follow her by assuming that she wouldn't lie to me. I drove out to the mall hoping that maybe she was meeting Carol there, but I saw no sign of either of them, so I went home. I felt like a miserable failure. My wife may very well be on her way to having an affair, and I lost track of her 1 minute from the house. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate, and the television was just annoying, so I just sat and pondered what might be going on. I suddenly had this image of Linda standing in her very SXY under things in front of some guy. Then I visualized her Sue Plowking on a big C. Then I imagined her being ducked by some stranger. At first, these images were making me sick. Update 1. I sat torturing myself until Linda finally came home around 11:30. When Linda came in, she was carrying a shopping bag from one of the stores in the mall, and she looked like someone who had just been out shopping. She came over and kissed me and apologized for being late. I asked why she was so late, and she said, when we got back to Carol's house, she invited me in for a cup of decaf coffee and a piece of cake. So the lie continues. Then Linda opened her shopping bag and asked if I wanted to see her new dress. It seemed that she wanted to change the subject. She showed me the dress, then put it back in the bag and left the bag on the chair and went into the kitchen for a glass of water and headed upstairs. Linda called down and asked me to bring up her new dress when I came up to bed. I picked up the bag and headed up the stairs and took up my spy post outside our bedroom door. Linda had just turned on the TV in our bedroom and was flipping channels with the remote when I got to the door. When she found the program she wanted, she put the remote down and began to remove her. As she removed, I could see that her BR sauce had red blotches in several places. It was beginning to look like someone had been Supam King and playing with my wife's tipasits. The realization of that was making me angry. Linda examined herself and gently ran her hands over her BRL sauce while she put her head back and closed her eyes. Now I was in a panic. I opened the shopping bag Linda had asked me to bring upstairs to see if she had put her panties in there. I dumped the contents of the bag on the floor. I didn't find her panties. What I found was another new panty and bra set from the same exclusive store, along with stockings and the dress she showed me earlier. When I picked up the sales receipt to see how much Linda had spent on these things, I noticed that all of the items in the bag had been charged on a MasterCard, and neither Linda nor I have a MasterCard. That was all I could take. I had to have some answers now. When I looked in our bedroom, Linda was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her back to me. I picked up the items I had dumped on the floor along with a receipt and went into the bedroom to confront Linda. When Linda heard the door open, she quickly got under the covers and tried to lie there innocently. I threw the dress and lingerie on the bed and asked Linda who bought this for her. Linda looked stunned. She said, "What do you mean?" I repeated, "Who bought these things for you? This is a MasterCard receipt and you don't have a MasterCard." I could see she was trying to come up with some kind of explanation about the clothes, so I decided to go for the throat. I said, "I would also like to know if the same person purchased the beautiful white bra and panty set you put on before you went out tonight." At this point, Linda looked like she was going to get sick. I continued on the attack. And I am even more curious to know why, when you got home, you weren't wearing the panties anymore." Linda was quiet for a minute. She looked up at me, her eyes as big as saucers, filling up with tears, and finally she started crying, saying over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." I waited for her to calm down and said very calmly, "Okay, now, I want you to tell me what is going on. I want to know everything. I am giving you one chance to explain, so make sure you tell me the truth no matter how painful." Linda started by saying, "First, you have to believe me when I say I love you and only you. This all started 6 months ago when we got a new division manager. After he had been here about 2 months, my manager told me that Mr. Gladstone wanted to see me to talk about my job and my career plans. When Mr. Gladstone greeted me in his office, he introduced himself and told me to call him Jim. He said that when he first got here, he requested that all of his managers give him resumes of their best and brightest employees. Jim said that my manager had given him my resume. Jim said that he read all of the resumes and then started observing these employees as they performed their jobs. By doing this, he was able to create a list of the people he considered to be candidates for promotion. His list consisted of 10 employees within our division. Jim told me I was on that short list. Linda reached for her glass of water, took a sip, and then continued. Next, Jim said that unfortunately in the next few years there would probably only be openings for about 4 of those on the list, and it is possible that in time more names could be added to the list. He said that in looking over the people he has on his list, it would be very difficult at this time to determine who he would promote if he had to make a decision right now. Then Jim said, "You know that you have a special attribute that if you chose to use it, that could make you the leading candidate for any promotions that come up in the next year or so." I asked him what that attribute was, and he said, "You are an attractive female." Then he told me to think that over and then thanked me for coming in as he escorted me to his door. I said, "That's sexual harassment." Linda put her hand up and asked me to let her finish. When I came home that night, I came to bed early and thought about what he said all night. At first, I thought I should turn him in for sexual harassment, but then realized I had no proof. It was my word against his, and it was possible that I misunderstood him. I decided not to mention anything to you because I didn't want to upset you. I thought I could handle it myself. I decided to ask for another meeting with Jim the next day to get this straightened out. At work the next morning, I called Jim's secretary and asked if I could get an appointment. She said she would ask him to see when he might be free. 10 minutes later, I was on my way to his office. When I stepped into his office, Jim said, "I was hoping I would see you today." I looked at Jim and asked just what he meant by using my special attributes to help get myself promoted. Jim said, "Okay, here it is. On paper, you look just like any of the other candidates on my list, but in your underwear, you would look much better." He must have seen how stunned I was by that comment. He told me to sit down and he offered me a cup of coffee. I said I was fine and asked him to continue, thinking that I might well be gathering evidence for a charge of sexual harassment. Then Jim continued saying, "I know that you're thinking this is sexual harassment, and you are probably right. But it is also an offer to help you come out ahead of your competition. It's a win-win situation." Finally, I just asked him what I would be expected to do for him. Jim, in a very matter-of-fact way, laid it out for me. He said, "First, if you agree, I will have your job changed so that you report directly to me, and your desk will be right outside my office. I will expect you to wear only dresses and skirts to work. The reason for that is so you can occasionally give me a flash of panties during the day. This will be a little play acting, as I would want it to appear accidental, and as though you are unaware that it happened. I would also like to get an accidental view down your blouse on occasion. As time goes on, we will escalate this behavior until we eventually have SX. As what I want from you changes, I will let you know by leaving a note or package on your desk." Then Jim concluded the meeting by saying, "I know this is all a bit overwhelming right now, but if you take time to think about it, I think you will see the advantages." Then he said, "Before you make a decision, call this person," and he handed me a business card. Before I went out the door, I turned and said, "You know I'm married, don't you?" Jim said, "Your husband will never know, and in the end, he will benefit too." Then, as I walked out the door, Jim said, "Let me know soon." Then he closed his door. Linda looked at me for comment, and I said, "Are you telling me this whole thing is about getting promotions?" Linda said, "Well, that's what started it." Then I called the person he suggested I call. It was a woman who identified herself as the director of distribution. I identified myself and told her that Jim Gladstone suggested I call her. She said that I didn't have to say anything more, that she knew what I wanted. She said that she worked for Jim 5 years ago. She said she made the deal with him and played his game and got everything she wanted, and also had a lot of fun along the way. "And without ever talking to me about this, you decided to go along with him?" Linda replied. "At first I thought I could just get away with the flashing my panties for him, and that a promotion opportunity would open up long before we had asexual relations. And I thought that I could always just say I changed my mind and back out of the deal anytime I felt I needed to." I said, "I want to know how it progressed from flashing panties to whatever point you have reached with him now." Linda took a deep breath and started again. "I thought that giving Jim a glimpse of panty once in a while would be easy, but it turned out to be the hardest part of this whole thing. After the first couple of weeks, Jim called me into his office to tell me this wasn't working out. He said I wasn't catching on to the idea of making it look real. He said I looked like I was just spreading my legs to show the world my... He said that if I didn't get the hang of it soon, our deal would be off and I would return to my old job. He told me to think of it as a game. I was miserable. He gave me my chance to get out, but I didn't want to go because I felt like a failure. I made my mind up I was going to do this right. I began by studying Jim's every move. I soon was able to tell at least 5 seconds in advance of when he would look out at me. That allowed me to be able to flash him at just the right time without even looking in his direction. Once I knew when to flash, then I concentrated on how to flash. I wanted to be able to give him the maximum view without looking fake or set up. After 2 weeks of this, I came into work one morning and found a package on my desk. Inside was a note from Jim saying that he was very happy with the way I had caught on to the game, and now it was time to dress it up a little. Inside the package were 5 pairs of panties, bikinis, and thongs. From here, things gradually escalated. The notes on my desk kept getting more detailed on what I was to do. Sometimes I would go into his office and bend over his desk to talk to him, and he would peek down the top of my dress or my blouse, and of course on the days I did that, I would be wearing a bear that would allow him to see most of my breasts, including my N+ peoples. Update. As Linda continued her story, I had to sit down. Linda went on. Next, the notes told me that sometime during the day, I should remove my and let Jim have a flash of my P-plazy. The first time I did this, I thought it was going to be the hardest thing I had done so far. I slipped into the bathroom on a mid-afternoon break and slipped my off and put them in my purse and went back to my desk. Suddenly, I realized that I was getting aroused thinking about flashing my bare P-plazy. I didn't give Jim a big open peek at that first time. Not because I was afraid to, but because I was having too much fun teasing him, knowing it was driving him crazy, trying to get a good look. Actually, I didn't give him a good open view of until the 4th time he asked for it. The next step came when my morning package contained a pair of panties, just like the ones he had asked me to wear that day, and an envelope with Jim's office mail drop address on it. There was no note. It took me only a couple of minutes to figure out what Jim wanted. I waited until about 10 that morning, then I went to the girls' room and went and sat in the stall. I then did something I had never done at work before. I began to finger myself. I began rubbing the crotch of all over to get as much of on them as possible. Then I took off and put them in the envelope and sealed it. Then I put on the new panties and headed back to work. I dropped the envelope in internal mail and went back to my desk. Later that afternoon, I saw the envelope being delivered to Jim, along with the rest of his mail. He slipped the envelope off his desk into his lap and opened it. I watched as he bent down behind his desk. I guessed that he must have been smelling. When he sat up straight again, he looked at me with a big smile on his face. A couple of days later, as I was getting ready to go home for the evening, I found a package on my desk. Inside was a black thong panty with a piece of paper pinned to them that said only tomorrow. So I wore those panties to work the next day. On my desk in the morning was a package. All that was inside this package was an envelope addressed to Jim. So later that morning, I went to the girls' room and removed and dropped then into the envelope. Of course, I gave them the proper scent before I took them off. That afternoon, when Jim received the envelope, he left his office and took the envelope with him. Jim returned a half hour later and stopped at my desk with a stack of papers he wanted me to review and respond to, and in that stack was the envelope. I slipped the envelope into my purse and went to the girls' room. When I removed from the envelope, I found a surprise in them. Jim had masks plus I baited into. I used some toilet paper to clean them up a little, then I put them on. At first I was a little grossed out by this, but later the thought of his C+M started to turn me on. Update. 3. I couldn't believe how much Linda was turning me on with her story. I should have been angry, but instead I was hopelani. I asked what's next. After that, Jim started buying me clothes, not just underwear, dresses, skirts, blouses. Then last month I found an envelope addressed to Jim. As usual, I put my scented panties into it. He didn't send them back that afternoon, and I began to think he was going to keep them. As I was closing up my desk to go home, Jim called me and asked me to come into his office. As I walked in, he asked me to close the door behind me. Then he said, "I just wanted to give you back your panties before you go home without them." He indicated that he wanted me to come around behind his desk. He had me standing against his desk facing him while he was still sitting in his chair. He took out of his desk drawer and told me to lift so he could see. When I did, he leaned forward and said that I smelled great. Next, he partly pushed me and partly lifted me onto his desk. Then he helped me off his desk. He didn't say another word as I left. The next day, there were no notes or envelopes all day. As I was getting ready to leave, Jim called me into his office again. I went in and closed the door, and when I turned around, Jim was sitting on the edge of his desk with his back to me. He was facing his desk chair, and he had one foot on the chair. He looked over his shoulder at me and said, "Come over here and sit in my chair." When I came around behind the desk, I saw that Jim had removed his... After that, Jim handed me a towel, and I wiped my hands and mouth and said good night and left. I looked at Linda and asked, "You never even let me in your..." Linda didn't look at me. She just replied, "Sometimes you have to change based on new situations." Update? 4. I didn't know if I wanted to listen to the rest of Linda's story or just dot in her mouth. The only thing I was sure of was I wasn't feeling anger or jealousy. In the end, I decided to let her tell the rest or the story. Linda picked up the story again. Nothing more happened till tonight. The call I got at dinner this evening was from Jim, not Carol. He told me I was to meet him at the bar in the downtown Hilton. When I got to the bar, Jim handed me the shopping bag and said they were the last gifts I would be getting from him. Then he told me that he had good news for me. He said that effective tomorrow, I was the new manager of the sales support team. He congratulated me, and we had champagne to celebrate. After we finished the champagne, I asked him if I owed him anything. He said I owed him nothing. He told me I was deserving of the job, otherwise he could not have recommended me for the position. He said the only regret he had was that I was leaving a week ahead of his schedule. He said in another week we would have had SX together. I don't know what came over me, but I looked at him and said, "Jim, I think you misread your schedule. I believe that you were supposed to have SX with me tonight." Jim looked at me and said, "Really? Well then, let me see if I can get us a room in this fine hotel." Jim disappeared and was back in 10 minutes with a key, and we headed up to the room. When we got to our room, I stood in front of Jim in the very expensive lingerie that I had bought originally to use on your birthday. "Sorry." I decided to take control, so I told Jim to lay down on the bed. Then I climbed on the bed and ... Afterward, we rested for a while, then I started getting dressed. Jim just lay on the bed watching me. When I had my cloths back on, he told me how beautiful I looked. I asked Linda, "When you say you cleaned up a little, did you take a shower or bath?" Linda looked puzzled and said, "No." Epilogue. Then I said, "So that so-called hot ducking saint of yours is still full of Jim's C+M, is that right?" Then I told Linda to uncover herself. Linda began to cry again. "You don't want to see me like this. Please, I didn't want to hurt you. I only love you." This wasn't about love. It was just about getting promoted, and I got caught up in Jim's game. "Please." This time I spoke more firmly. "Linda, remove the covers so I can see you." Linda closed her eyes and threw back the blankets, and then put her hands over her face. I looked at that beautiful body, and I couldn't feel anger toward her, but I sure as hell felt lust. Suddenly, Linda sat up and grabbed me and kissed me and said, "I love you." Then I said, "If you do that, then pack your bags and get out of my house before I kick you out."